The books and records of the past are disappearing fast. The libraries of 200 years ago contained more ancient works for which no trace can be found today outside references in other books. But enough chronological knowledge has been preserved that we can put back the pieces of the past to confidently assert and be able to show authoritatively that the year 2022 is the year 5916 of the old world's calendar. We have 18 more years before the next and final Phoenix reset, and that a lot will transpire before that occurs. This Archaix's analysis of the historical and archaeological record will show that the timekeeping systems and calendars of recorded history marked significant events, that they were far more advanced and sophisticated than we have been led to believe, and that they are not singularly independent systems of time calculation, but rather enmeshed systemic protocols that together build a false narrative of history designed to specifically construct versions of the past that will induce human subjects to follow certain trajectories into the future. This is episode 1 of Archaix 2.0. Because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, we must begin this study as simple and comprehensive as possible. It will be in numerous videos. I will not monetize this channel, but instead rely on donations and on selling my 337-page chart pack, timeline of ancient world history, and other writings on Gumroad. The links to donation buttons, several Gumroad items for sale, and all my playlists featuring over 200 videos is below in the description box and the pinned comment. Be careful, my listener. As a student of Oliver Wendell Holmes, I must inform you that when the human mind is stretched by a new idea, it can never go back to its original dimensions. Tread carefully in the dark. So from this point on, we are going into unknown waters, starting from ground zero. No dating in mind whatsoever. We're going to start with a common denominator from the ancient world, a person that is remembered in the ancient Americas, in Europe, Africa, and Asia. He has gone by many names. Bokika, Utnapishtim, Noah, Manu, Noah. There's so many. I'm not going to go through it here. That's not what the study is about. But Noah of the book of Genesis in the Bible is a very intriguing person. He is said to have lived 600 years. I don't believe that. I believe that to cover for something else. I'm going to show it to you. Now, we begin this analysis in the year 1895. J.D. Parsons was a prolific preacher, a researcher, an author. He published a book called Our Sun God, Christianity Before Christ. And in there, he made a reference to the 600-year period known to the ancients. As a matter of fact, I have it. I'm going to read it for you right now. In 1895 AD, the historian J.D. Parsons wrote, Noah's birth was, quote, this is from the book in 1895, Noah's birth was at the meeting point of two of those famous cycles of 600 years, so often referred to by ancient writers. If it was so often referred to by ancient writers, then we must find evidence of this 600-year period, and we're going to link it to a survivor of the flood. This is how we do that. We go 2,000 years into the past to Flavius Josephus, a Jewish writer, a Roman citizen, who put together a most amazing history of the world. A lot of it is very biblical, and a lot of it's not. Flavius Josephus has 3 works. 2 of them are gigantic. They're huge. But Josephus, he too has something to say about the 600-year period. And remember, we're not starting with any definitive date in mind. We're going to let the ancient references give us the date. That's how this study's going to go. Then we're going to build from that. I'm going to show you some very profound things in this video, much less the videos that follow. We're going to be putting together the architecture of history in a way that you have never seen before, replete with the source materials. Okay guys, so allow me to read from this 2,000-year-old text by Flavius Josephus. Bear with me, this is a direct quote. A lot of my references are going to be direct quotes. I can't just rely from memory, not for the Archaix 2.0 project. So in Antiquities of the Jews, composed 2,000 years ago, we have a direct quote. Let no one, upon comparing the lives of the ancients with our lives, and with the few years which we now live, think that what we have said of them is false, or make the shortness of our own lives at present an argument that neither did they attain so long a duration of life. For those ancients were beloved of God, and lately made by God himself. And because their food was then fitter for the prolongation of life, might well live so great a number of years. And besides, God afforded them a longer life on account of their virtue and the good use they made of it in astronomical and geometrical discoveries, which would not have afforded the time for foretelling the periods of the stars, unless they had lived 600 years. For the great year is completed in that interval. Josephus then goes on to cite other ancient writers that agreed with him. He mentions Berosus of Babylon, who studied at Alexandria. He mentions Mochus, Hestiaeus, Hieronymus the Egyptian, Hesiod the Greek, Hecataeus, I believe he was Ionian, Hellenicus, I don't know who this is, Acusilos, I never heard of him, Ephorus I know, Nicholas I don't, I think he's a Christian writer. Well, he can't be, because this is Josephus. But he mentions all these ancient writers as agreeing with him on this deal. But if Josephus mentions a 600-year period, other ancient writers also mention it as well. And as we will see, the 600-year period is far more ancient than 2,000 years ago. It is recorded in historical cuneiform text going back 2,000 years before Josephus. And the reference to the food being fitter for the prolongation of life is evidence of the vapor canopy, because Josephus is writing about the pre-flood people. They lived under the vapor canopy when fruits and vegetables, flora, fauna, and people grew to astonishing sizes. So years ago, I read a book. I was a Christian at the time, and as most Christians do, we edit out material that completely goes against what we have been trained to believe. And at that time, I was still holding on to that paradigm, and I believed the fundaments of the Old Testament and the New Testament. I believed the materials that the preachers were passing on to me, the Christian literature. I had fallen for the paradigm because I was born into it. 40 years as a Southern Baptist Christian, and my life, my other videos talk about this so much, I don't want to go into it now. At this time of my life, I read the writings of the scholar Issachara. She is fantastic. I did not appreciate the depth of her research at that time because it went against my belief systems. But I never forgot some of the things that I read in that book. They planted seeds in me. I recommend that book. The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold. It is fantastic. But in that book, Issachara specifically mentions, in her research, she come across evidence from old records that it was a belief in ancient times that every 600 years a divine man was brought into the world. So in the book of Genesis, this is the text that we have about Noah. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, the floodwaters were upon the earth. So here we have another admission in a scriptural account of a 600-year period. And in the book of Genesis, we also have a reference to the 360-day year, which was in Genesis, where it mentions that the waters of the flood were on the earth for 150 days, and then names that as 5 months. Well, that to be 150 days in 5 months means each month back then was exactly 30 days. It would have been a 360-day year. Now, an interesting aside, I have mentioned this in my books, in my posts on Facebook, and in several of my videos, that Genesis, the book of Genesis, and the book of Revelation are the alpha and omega of eschatology. They are very profound. They provide a cipher. They have symbols that are interrelated. But you can't find those same symbols anywhere else in the Bible. Only Genesis and Revelation. This 150-day period is the same thing. It's also mentioned in the book of Revelation. In the Apocalypse, the locusts give a time. They are appointed a divine time to torment mankind for 5 months. The same duration of time that the waters of the flood were upon the earth for 150 days, for 5 months. Also, I have mentioned that we have much evidence that the 360-day year will return during the apocalypse, probably when the vapor canopy returns, and that the abbreviation of time, the condensed calendar, will begin once the world is returned to a 360-day year. But that's an interesting tangent we'll get into later. It's not really relevant to this study. Many of you are familiar with Robert Temple, the author of The Sirius Mystery. I am not a fan. I disagree with many of his findings. I think he's a sensationalist. He's a lot like Graham Hancock to me. However, like I said in prior videos, I find value in the research of others, even though I disagree with their conclusions. And in this instance, Robert Temple admits in one of his writings that he found in an old book from 1829 by an author named Higgins, a book called Celtic Druids, that has some obscure references to an ancient belief in a 600-year period, which is interesting because his book is about Stonehenge and other stone and archaeological monuments spread throughout the United Kingdom today. Robert Temple doesn't go into a lot of depth. He just cites his source materials and say it's a book from 1829. So I did a little homework and I got online. I don't like to Google things. Don't care about Google. There's too much misinformation online. I'm a hard copy guy. I like my books. I like my reports in paper in my hand. But I Googled this and I found a copy of that book, 1829, Higgins, Celtic Druids. They must be pretty rare because the only copy I could find, somebody's trying to sell it for $200. But that's neither here nor there. It's just another data point that many researchers 100 years ago or so had access to data that allowed them to discover these things for which it's being erased. We can't find these materials anymore. They're getting more and more uncommon. So Flavius Josephus is not the only one to cite the Babylonian historian Berosus. Alexander Polyhistor and Eusebius also cited him. As a matter of fact, concerning the Chaldean Chronicle, let's read exactly what Eusebius said. Now, he's quoting from Alexander Polyhistor about Berosus. It says, "Here is what Berosus related in Book 1 and in Book 2, and what he wrote about the kings one by one. He mentions the period when Nabonassar was king, but merely records the kings' names, not saying anything precise about their deeds, perhaps because he did not consider that they had done anything worth recalling." Now, we have to skip over some of these parts, but Apollodorus says that Olorus was the first Chaldean king to rule Babylon, reigning for 10 sars. A sar consists of 3,600 years. And this, broken down into units, called ners. He says that 1 ner is 600 years. Now, I want to call to your attention the fact that the ner system is at least 2,000 years older than Josephus, who mentioned the 600-year period being the great year. I have received criticism from people on Amazon and Amazon reviews because they completely nullify my research by an opinion that a 600-year period never existed. My Anunnaki Homeworld book has received some very negative reviews from people who have never read the research. They've never read my book. But simply because it mentions a 600-year period, and these so-called historians claim that no such period existed in antiquity, they gave me very unfavorable reviews. But I've had trolls chasing me since 2004 when Nature magazine, well, I don't even want to go into all that. I've already got videos about that. I'm going to continue to be under attack. It's no big deal. So anyway, the Ner was a very definitive period. It's a Sumerian measurement. It was 600 years. What's relevant to our study here is that the 600-year Ner period mentioned by Berosus and Alexander Polyhistor and Eusebius is relative, to the 10 kings before the flood. It's right here. There is a history enumerated. All 10 kings are named by Berosus. I'm looking at the Berosus document right now. It mentions Olorus and Alaparus, Agamemnon, Amegalorus, Dionysius, whatever his name is. The 10th king being Xisuthros. We know that as Utnapishtim was Sumer. He is the Noah of the ancient Near East. Yeah, I don't need to go into all these details. I just wanted to show you that there was a period in ancient times. It's recognized there was a 600-year period. It doesn't matter if it doesn't comport with modern historical vantage points and views on ancient history. The ancients themselves did have a 600-year period. It's right here. It's disturbing to me that when I try to Google things that I have read from 19th and early 20th century books, I can't find any references to these things. One of these is the Ner. Now, in my book Anunnaki Homeworld, and especially in my book Return of the Fallen Ones, which is all about the Anunnaki, I cite over and over the historical books, the translators who published about this numeric system, the Ner system. One of the really unique finds in a book from about 120 years ago is a text that says that the gods of heaven, the gods of earth, the great gods, 50 are they. The gods of fate, 7 are they. The Anunnaki of heaven, 300. The Anunnaki of earth, 600. And over we find that the Ner is a reference to the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki are referred to as the 600. We find this over and over. But when you Google these things, you can't find any references to them. I don't understand. But then again, I kind of do. But the Ner is a mysterious unit of measurement, but all of this information, it just lends credit to the supposition that long ago it was quite popular. It's also found in the name of a goddess, Neruda. Neruda was the goddess linked to the 7 Anunnaki in several texts. This Ner syllable is very ancient. In the Greek versions of Noah, we find Deucalion, the new wine sailor. Remember, in the Genesis text, the first thing Noah did after getting off, he became a drunk and he was making wine. And this is preserved in the Greek story as well. Deucalion was the new wine sailor. He survived the flood and he repeopled the earth. But Deucalion had a specific title. His title was Nereus, which is nothing but the Sumerian Ner with the Greek epithet for, it's a pronoun, Eus. Nereus was the father of the Nereids. So, like mermaids, water sprites in the ocean. So, it's just the 600-year period, we have too much evidence of it. Even with evidence disappearing, we're still able to pull this data from the diminishing sources and put this together. It was the point of this video is to show you there's a 600-year period in antiquity, and it is the vertebrae by which the entire skeleton of all the world calendars builds the body to of as reality. This is where we're going with this. This is just the very beginning. So Josephus began our study about Noah concerning the 600-year period, this great year. Well, we have to return to the authority of Flavius Josephus yet again, because from a chronological perspective, we still need to identify what year the flood was, to determine 600 years earlier when Noah was born, to determine 600 years before that what major significant event impacted humanity by which it would have been on the 600-year timeline. So, we find that in Flavius Josephus, Abraham was born 292 years after the flood. This is a data point. We have, by the authority of Seder Olam, ancient rabbinical text, that Abram was born in the year 1948 Annus Mundi, in the 1948th year of the Old World calendar. And now, because I have not committed these things to memory, I'm going to read you this. Now, Moses Maimonides, about 1,000 years ago, he wrote that Abraham was born in 1947 BC of our calendar. This is very significant because we just saw that in the Hebrew rabbinical text of Seder Olam, Abram was born in 1948 of the Old World calendar. 1948 of the Old World calendar is 1947 BC. And there is an annular overlap where the years, because the ancient year was not January 1st. One of these timelines is going backwards in time. One's going forward in time. They are the exact same year. This is a calendrical node, and we're going to come across some more of these. They're very interesting. It's when we reach the exact same year in two different calendrical systems, but one's going forward in time and one's going backwards. Remember this. You're going to come across it some more. Now, Eliezer Schulman, in Sequence of Events in the Old Testament, a very famous book. Any of you can Google that. He dates Abram's birth in the year 1948 BC. That's pretty interesting. Velikovsky and so many others, they all pretty much adhere to this dating. So 292 years Abram is born, 1947 BC. We simply add 292 years to 1947 BC to arrive at the year 2239 BC. 2239 BC would be the date of the Great Flood. Now, if that's true, then that means 2839 BC is the birth of Noah. But Noah was born at the intersect between two major 600-year epochs. This makes 600 years before the birth of Noah was the year 3439 BC. Those of you who have been following my videos, you know these two dates very, very good. 3439 BC was the arrival of the Anunnaki. They are called the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. 600 years before the Nephilim dynasty began. Noah was born in the first year of the oppression, 2839 BC. 600 years later, his descendants escaped the flood in a fleet of arks. This is all in my videos, especially my Anunna files. What this has to do with the Phoenix chronology is a whole nother video, because we're not deriving any dates using the Phoenix timeline in this video. We're only using biblical dating and secular and canonical sources. So it's profound that we can date the flood at 2239 BC, especially considering it comports exactly to the year as the Phoenix timeline. But even more importantly, biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, who has dated every dateable event in the Bible using the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, the book of 1st and 2nd Enoch, and the Assyrian eponyms in tandem with the biblical books themselves. He is a chronologist, and he wrote a fascinating book called The Secrets of Time. In that book, he specifically dates the birth of Noah using sources that I haven't even mentioned yet as 2839 BC, which makes the Great Flood 2239 BC, which Stephen Jones agrees with, which dates the descent of the Watchers at 3439 BC. They all comport. He also dates the birth of Abram at 1947 BC. This type of coherency is not fictional. You can't make this up. The source materials span thousands of years, and yet it all perfectly lines up. So perfectly, in fact, that you're going to see, as more videos unfold, how these other calendars relate to this and also specify these same dates. It's fascinating. Now here's a simple chart you can look at right here. It shows exactly what this video is about. At the bottom of the chart, you can see two 600-year periods. These are the Ners. Each Ner is 5 great shars. A great shar is 120 years. Like in the book of Genesis, Noah was given 120-year warning of the flood coming. 120 is one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest denominators in Sumerian mathematics. So this 1200-year period began in 3439 BC with the descent of the Watchers and 1/3 of the world human population being killed. I address this and go into great detail in the Anunna files. Now 600 years later is the birth of Noah. But as I show in the Anunna files, the birth of Noah is just a cover story. Noah didn't live 600 years to the flood. Noah may not even be a real person. But what had happened was that a matriarchal, dark-skinned society went into shock when in 1 year they were starting to have Caucasian babies. The babies were blue-eyed and green-eyed with alabaster skin. They didn't know what to think of it because they were dark-haired and dark-eyed with dark skin, and it shocked them. And many men accused their wives of having sex with angels. This comes from Dead Sea Scrolls. It comes from ancient Haggadah text. I don't need to go into those details because I've already discussed all that in depth in the Anunna files. You can go back and watch those videos. But this new dynasty was born, and it lasted 600 years until a cataclysm, a reset caused by Phoenix. We know this as the Great Flood, which wasn't a worldwide flood. It was basically it was the creation of the Mediterranean and Black Sea. But I also have videos about that you can go watch. So here it is, 2839 BC, Noah is born. It is the beginning of the 670-year Anunnaki dynasty. It is actually the 70th year because for the first 70 years, it was a matriarch. It was a female ruling. She was followed by 7 male kings. This is why we have a lot of confusion in ancient records, but with clarity, we remember in the ancient American tradition Spider Grandmother. Spiders are arachnids, and it denotes an 8, the number 8 as being significant. In the Sumerian records, we have a goddess who attends the 7 kings. We also have references to the 8 kings of Sumer, but we never find the 8th king. Instead, we keep seeing over and over in the Sumerian ideograms references to a female. So, we'll get into all that later. 600 years after the birth of Noah, we have the Great Flood. And then 292 years later, entering into secular history, we have the birth of Brahma, which you know of as Abram, which the Jews, when they completely rewrote the older Israelite Amorite records, changed him to Abraham and wrote themselves into a genealogy for which they do not belong. But again, that's another series of videos that I'll probably have to release on BitChute and Telegram, because I sure as hell can't talk about that on YouTube. These videos are going to get deeper. They're going to get more complex, but I'm going to ease into it slowly. I'm not trying to leave anybody behind. For those of you who want to go deeper, to understand more clearly the things I'm talking about, and you require visuals, I do provide them. I do have a PDF file that has 337 charts. This video, you just saw one of those charts. 337 charts and illustrations showing the history of the world as I have come to discover it. These videos are going to show you the exact source materials and dates by which these charts take on a whole new life. Also, right here you can also see my Archaix timeline of the ancient world. It will help you to understand the sequence of events. It's not really detailed. It's just a summary of what happened each year before the flood and after the flood. If you want to go into real depth, if you want to see source materials, if you want to see some really intense gematria and chronographical studies, then get my Chronicon. Just get the first part, because it's all we're doing videos on right now. The pre-flood world, the vapor canopy world in the few centuries after the flood. Get the before the flood, get the Archaix timeline, get the 337 charts, share them with your friends. I have no restrictions. Once you're in possession of it, if you produce it and send it all to your friends and family, I will never know, and nor do I care. Just do it. It's more important to me to get that information out than to try to worry about somebody freely distributing stuff that I'm basically giving away very inexpensive. So this is how I support my channel. I will not monetize this channel ever. YouTube does not spread the word about my channel. They give me no favors, no help, because I have refused them multiple times. I'm not with it. I really do hope that you guys come to an understanding of world history the way I see it. But the only way that's going to happen is if you stick with these videos and you learn from me, because I'm freely giving this information out. And if I have the time, I work full time. So for me to take the time out of my life to produce this material, you should owe it to yourself to take the time out of your life just to listen. You don't have to believe anything, but don't turn away from the Archaix data because it makes you uncomfortable. We are going somewhere with all of this. My name is Jason. This is Archaix.com, and I hope you guys have a really good evening. This analysis begins with the year 5239 BC. It is entirely a human chronology, no matter where these humans came from. This thesis serves to demonstrate that the ancient calendars we have today were initiated by events connected to and as a result of the Nemesis Cataclysm. The first chronomarker in this study is from 5239 to 4639 BC. Now, this is a 600-year period. 600 years is a long period of time. A lot can happen. 600 years ago was the year 1422 AD, when less than 1% of the world's population could read, and 90% of the people alive had never ventured more than 5 miles from their place of birth. It was 185 years before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock to found the English colonies in North America that would become the United States. 1422 AD was 354 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed. 1422 was just 443 years before the Civil War ended in 1865. It was 481 years before Orville and Wilbur Wright at Kitty Hawk successfully demonstrated manned flight in the year 1903. 1422 AD was 541 years before the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and 569 years before the Internet. 600 years is a very long time. In just 200 years, we went from horse and buggy to cell phones, from coal-burning stoves to nuclear reactors. And the history of our world is complex, and much evidence exists that we have been technologically advanced a few times in the past. We have a lot of ground to cover in this video, and after each chronographical section, I will provide you a summary. We are going deeper than any historical analysis that you have ever partaken in. My research, time management, and ability to produce all this material is funded by myself and by donations. If you appreciate the data and presentations and are able, please donate. Links are available below. Also, this entire presentation with all 5 color charts are available on Gumroad. They are crystal clear PDFs, so you can read the data and look at the charts and be able to show friends and family what you have learned. Gumroad link is below. Just look for Archaix's Doomsday Chart. I'm sorry for the title, but I've got to name it something. Here is the very first chart in this analysis. Now, this video is combining all 4 charts. The first one is the Phoenix history. Those of you who have been following my videos, you know I have an entire playlist, 30-something videos all about these events. We're talking about a phenomenon that occurs somewhere in the world every 138 years. It's mud floods, liquefaction, induced subsidence of surfaces, red rains, reddish dust, moon turns red, a new star appears, earthquakes, sun darkens, mass vanishings of human populations, regional, hemispheric, sometimes worldwide. Now, this, like I said, this is only one aspect of the chronology we are discussing. We are synthesizing 4 different ancient timekeeping systems and drawing entirely new conclusions. Here's the chronology of the Nemesis X object. Many people like to call it Nibiru. It is a very unusual periodicity. This object, throughout history, has a 792-year perfect orbit. 60 of those years are in the inner solar system, while 732 of those years are outside the solar system on its way back to Nemesis. Here is the Mayan long count, the mysterious Mayan long count for which almost the entire world has fallen for a misrepresentation. It is 1,872,000 days. This is 13 backtons of 144,000 days each. And like I said, we're going to get into more specifics on these calendars. I'm just showing it to you at the beginning of the video. This is the 3rd timekeeping system by which we're going to analyze and put into a single chart. But the Mayan long count ends in 2046 like so many other systems. It begins in 3113 BC with a major impact event that happened in the Western Hemisphere. The second calendar is the Anunna neurochronology. It's 600-year periods known in antiquity as the Great Years. All 600-year periods are denoted here. The black boxes you see here denote when different planetary bodies arrived into our system, including Earth. The green has some pretty interesting data. We're going to get into all that. The white as well. This is all compartmentalized. These charts will be available on Gumroad. You'll see them. But this is the 600-year Great Period. It started off as an Anunnaki calendar. And it seems like every 600 years that there is something that occurs in this world that is still thematic of what its inception. It is a very unusual study. But we'll get to that further in this video. Here is the chart on the far left column where we begin here, where you see right here the first 600-year period, the beginning of it, Anunnaki Ner Great Year Period. This single line on the far left margin represents the year 5239 BC right here, the Nemesis Cataclysm. This is when the Nemesis Cataclysm occurred. We had two suns, one star collapsed. Nemesis implodes, sending Earth, Luna, the dark satellite, Nemesis X object, Electra, and Phoenix hurling toward the other sun, which we know of as Sol, our present star. Now, Electra no longer exists. It is a planet that collided into another world after the Cataclysm and today remains adrift in the asteroid belt. 600 years later, we have absolutely nothing in the historical record for this 600-year period. It's like darkness, dark age. 600 years later, 4639 BC, Earth is captured in orbit around Sol, exactly 600 years after the Nemesis Cataclysm. Which leads us not to the next 600-year period, but in this chronology, we now arrive to 4309 BC. Phoenix is named in the Gnostic trimorphic protenoid text. The world, our Earth, is destroyed. Phoenix is to return in the last days. The Anima Elish text basically it's a cataclysm that rains blood on the Earth. This is a 930-year-old civilization destroyed, which began in 5239 BC. Now, we don't know if that destruction occurred on Phoenix, on Mars, or on Earth. There are hints of it in old records, and the Jews misinterpreted Babylonian records, and they claimed that it was Adam who died in his 930th year of age, but that's not what the original Semitic records conveyed. It was the Adamu who died in their 930th year. That's neither here nor there. Now, on the Origin of the World text of the Nag Hammadi Library, it names Phoenix, and in the Holy Tablets, Near Eastern records that were translated by Diop, we find that a strange cloud hid the sun. So we move forward. So we see that the first 600-year period involved Earth arriving to the Sol system. Then the next significant event was Phoenix arriving to the Sol system. In 4039 BC, we have the capture of Luna. It is known as the capture flood, something that Hans Bellamy, Hans Boehringer, and Immanuel Velikovsky wrote about. This is the capture flood. The moon appears in our orbit, arriving from the destroyed Nemesis system. Here is the third object to appear in our system. It is exactly on the 600-year Anunnaki timeline. This is followed by the event of 3895 BC on the 138-year Phoenix periodicity timeline. 3895 BC, lithospheric displacement. There is a 30-degree pole shift. It causes a new heavens and a new earth. The destruction on earth is so totaled, it is considered as a new creation. That's how it's exactly conveyed in the Bible in the book of Genesis. So, Phoenix appears as a fiery flaming sword in the sky. This is also mentioned in Genesis. This is year 1 of the ancient world calendar. This is also the very first year of the vapor canopy, the 1656 years of the pre-flood world. So the next significant event in our timeline happens to also be on the Anunnaki Ner 600-year timeline. It is 3439 BC. It's the Gihon flood. A third of mankind dies in the cataclysm. Enki arrives with the Anunna. the Nemesis X object Passover from the Nemesis system occurs. This is another object from the Nemesis system. Its inception, the first time it appears in the system, happens to be 3439 BC. Enki arrives, 1/3 of mankind is destroyed. It's called the Gihon flood, and it appears to follow the exact same pattern, that all these ancient calendars began, or they had key nodal aperture dates when significant events occurred that were between both stars, such as the departure of worlds from one star to the other. Now, the Near Eastern text cited by Diop states that the Anunnaki only had a 60-year window to get to Earth. This is the same date Enoch appears in the biblical chronology as well. The 60-year window is very interesting because, as we saw in this other chart that I posted in Archaix, and I showed at the beginning of this video, that chart's very unique because it shows that the Nemesis X object has a 792-year orbit. But 60 of those 792 years, that object, which is represented here as these black spheres, large and small ones, that's the Nemesis X object appearing in world history. That object is unknown to us. We don't know exactly what it is. It causes great destructions. It has been visibly seen. But it's in the inner system with Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Earth for 60 years. That's a long period of time. It stays here, so it's a very slow-moving object. And according to Diop and even Zecharia Sitchin, there is opportunity for the Anunna to go back and forth at certain times while it's here, and then it's gone. Now, of course, Sitchin says it's every 3,600 years, but that was entirely contrived. He wanted to match his theory with Sumerian Shar reckoning, and the whole thing's a convoluted mess. And I've gone into that in other videos. I'm not going to address it here. But the orbit of this body is 792 years, 732 years. It is south of the solar system, traveling along the Nemesis ecliptic. It's no longer on Sol's ecliptic like we are today. 3439 BC, right here, the very first appearance of the Nemesis X object begins the Technolithic period. Technolithic architecture is fantastic. The tolerances are unbelievable. Scalar boring, hyperbolic curves. We're talking about building with stone with a technology that seems to make stone yield. It's very interesting. Very few technolithic pieces of architecture on this planet outside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Some monuments in Punka. It looks like there may be some in Angkor Wat. Technolithic architecture is not like megalithic. It is very precise. Now, just after this 3439 BC event, before the Mayan long count, this period of time right here, Anunna civilization is in North America. They're moving to 3439 BC. They are moving to the old world that we know. Egypt, the Harappan Valley civilization, Sumer, Babylon. But there's a mass exodus coming from the Americas to here. And this is when the Sumerian story begins with the arrival of the Anunna. Now, the Babylonians said it was Oannes, and he came from the sea, but it's the same thing. It's during this period we have the Olmec calendar begins in 3373 BC. Stonehenge 1 and Newgrange are constructed in 3163 BC. Enoch becomes an emperor at this period over 130 provinces. The Mayan Itza Temple of the Cross calendar begins in 3121 BC. They're all right here in this little period after this object appears and causes this great reset destruction. These are mentioned because these are all calendars, or they're associated to timekeeping systems. Many ancient megalithic monuments in the world were all attached to the idea of passages of time and how to monitor them. Then we come to this yellow area here. You see 3113 BC. This is in the smack dab middle of the vapor canopy period, the 1656 years of the pre-flood world. We have an impact event. North America, precisely in the Badlands of Montana, is a terrible impact event. Those who remained in the Americas that didn't flee with the rest of the Anunna were obliterated. If there were survivors, they did not survive as the Anunna. They were absorbed into other cultures that either enslaved them or ate them or whatever was going on in North America at the time. There's a long period of time in North America for which there is no settlements. There was nothing but just pure nature there. It was destroyed. The Mayan long count is purely an American calendar. It's in a countdown of 1,872,000 days, which is 13 bactans of 144,000 days, to get to the date of 130000, which is the next impact event in North America in the year 2046. We'll get to that. It's over here in the end of this timeline. Now, just after this event, we have a continuation of this period when all these different cultures were creating new calendars. In 3103 BC, we have the beginning of the Vedic Kali Yuga Black Age calendar. And in 2909 BC, we have the 241,200 turnings of the Sumerian king list. That's right here where you see my little cursor moving. 241,200 turnings of the Sumerian king list it's been wildly misinterpreted by so many people, including Zechariah Sitchin, to be 241,200 years, but it's not true. It's just like the Chinese Dragon King chronology. The Dragon Kings ruled over the ancient Chinese. They're just like the 7 kings of the Anunnaki. They only ruled for 646 years in the Chinese version, but in the Sumerian version, they ruled for 241,200 turnings. Now, that's not years. Those are, you got to understand, the original calendar under the vapor canopy was a stellar calendar, and it was a matriarchal society. Turnings is how many times the stars turned around Alpha Draconis, the Eye of the Dragon, the ancient pole star before 2239 BC, altered the pole star to Ursa Minor. Now, the pole star here was the Eye of the Dragon, Alpha Draconis. All the stars every day surrounded one single turning of the deal was evening to morning. This is recorded in Genesis. The only timekeeping system back here was important was days. 241,200 days under the draconian calendar of 360 days a year was a very simple 670 years exactly, which comports to the Chinese Dragon King chronology, which is at the exact same time in history. Now, during this period also we have 2908 BC when Enoch, who appeared here, all of a sudden here vanishes before witnesses into the sky, which leads us to the next 600-year period. Here it is right here. Right here where the cursor's moving at this 600-year Anunnaki nerd junction, we have 2839 BC. And on that date, Noah was born. And if those of you who have watched my videos, you will already know there was a lot of controversy at Noah's birth. Noah didn't look like the pre-flood people under the goddess, under the matriarchy. They had smooth skin, hairless skin, dark eyes, swarthy skin. They were short of stature. Noah represents an entirely new race. They were considered sons of the Anunna. This is the event in history in Genesis chapter 6 where the sons of God took the daughters of men and they gave birth to a new race. This new race, Nephilim, were great men, men of renown, heroes, large of stature. Now, later on in history, some of this resulted in some demonizing, but initially, the men of renown, and it was a whole new race of white-skinned, gemstone-eyed people, and Noah was a part of this birthing. And people were panicked. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the book of Lamech and Apocalypse of Abraham. You'll read these testimonies from antiquity where the people before the flood were panicking because the babies that were being born looked like the sons of angels. They didn't understand what was going on. This was on the Anunnaki nerd chronology exactly 2839 BC, which was 600 years before the Great Flood. And remember, in the book of Genesis, Noah is said to have lived 600 years, and in the 600th year, the waters of the flood were upon the earth. I'm not saying any of that's true. I'm saying this is what's been handed down to us in all these ancient chronographies. Now, just shortly after this, in 2815 BC, the Great Pyramid of Giza is built at the exact location called Akuzan, where Enoch vanished before witnesses. And in 2778 BC, we have the beginning of the Egyptian short chronology, according to scholars. It's all right here at the same time. In 2713 BC, right here where the cursor is, you see, this is the end of the first Bacton. 144,000 days have passed since an impact event of something large from the sky crashing into the Badlands of Montana and erasing a North American civilization. Now, this is right here. This is 2713 BC. One Bacton has passed. There's 12 more to go until the next impact event. So right here, right past that, we have 2699 BC. It is the traditional start date of Chinese civilization. It's right here. It's attached to, it's really close to the Mayan date. And in 2653 BC, we have another Phoenix deal. Here it is right here. In 2653, Zechariah Sitchin himself notes that in Near Eastern texts refer to a major disaster. Right behind it, in 2647 BC, the Nemesis X object departs the Sol system to begin a 732-year journey back toward Nemesis. Amazing Chinese tradition for this period refers to a 60-year period that was very important, and it was attached to the date circa 2637 BC. This is beyond coincidence. Robert Temple reveals that ancient, highly regarded period was 60-year cycle in a calendar and was represented in many ways. Now, at this time, 2647 BC, we have the Anunna Exodus. It is a full departure. It starts the abandonment and shock period, which is 408 years to the Great Flood. The same 408 years remembered in ancient American traditions belonging to the water sun age. Remember, this is a vapor canopy. This is partially the water sun age. During these 60 years, right here, the Anunna vanish and post-Technolithic period begins. Post-Technolithic period is not like the Technolithic period. The Technolithic period was from 3439 BC to the building of the Great Pyramid. Once the pyramid was complete, this entire race of people vanished from the historical record. We don't know. They weren't here very long, the Anunna, but they appeared in the historical record from 3439 BC. They vanished 792 years later. And when they vanished, that began the post-Technolithic period. The post-Technolithic period is full of ancient monuments all around the world that show that people were utilizing some type of technology that did amazing things to stone and rock, but they did practice runs. There are thousands of sites around the world where people are just, they're bewildered by what's found. It looks like somebody was practicing on how to do things with rock and stone and upside down staircases and cutting laser precision niches. It's like the people didn't really understand how to use the technology that had been left to them. But that's post-Technolithic period. That's a subject for some other videos. Now, 2357 BC, during this 408-year period right here, when they've abandoned, when the ancients were carving giant effigies and using rocks to make patterns that could only be seen in the sky, because they were trying to induce the Anunna to return. They were trying to employ methods of sympathetic magic to get these people to come back. That's what the Nazca lines are about. That's what the CERN giant is about. That's what a bunch of these sky-facing effigies were about. And this is the period that they were created. Now, In 2357 BC, we have the first year of the Emperor Yao of the Chinese tradition. That's right here in the smack dab middle of the Sumerian king list, 7 Anunnaki kings who were ruling over a Sumerian civilization. Then we have 2313 BC. Mayan backed in 144,000 days are complete. It is right here where this cursor is moving, right before the flood. We don't know what happened on that date. We just know there was a lot of chaos in the world at the time. But we do know that the 7th king of the Nephilim dynasty, he ascended the throne at Shuruppak in 2291 BC. Right here in this area where the cursor, right before the flood, the 7th king takes the throne 51 years before the flood. Now, according to the Egyptian Coptic records, there is a claim in those texts that in 2283 BC, the writings of the Great Pyramid were copied and they were hidden at this period right before the flood. And in 2254 BC is a Chinese traditional date for the Great Flood. It is only 15 years off. That's pretty precise. Then we have right here the Great Flood. Absolutely phenomenal. So this chart right here, you can see Nemesis Cataclysm, Earth, Luna, Phoenix, Nemesis, Nemesis X object, Dark Satellite are catapulted towards Sol in 5239 BC. It takes 600 years for Earth to adopt its orbit right here in 4639 BC. It takes another 600 years for the Moon to appear right here. It takes another 600 years for Nemesis X object to appear right here. You have to understand, this precision is unnatural, but you cannot claim that I made up these dates. This 3439 BC date I've already shown in many other videos. Other chronologists come up with these dates. I'm talking about precisely this date. So this wasn't me. Now, the Phoenix date. This is 138 year Phoenix periodicity is right here. Every single one of these little boxes right here is 138 years going all the way to the year May 16th, 2040. It's right here. Now, here's the 930 years of Civilization X. I know that Civilization X, these 930 years, refers to the Anunna civilization that was thriving. When the Nemesis Cataclysm occurred, I don't know where this civilization, maybe it was on Earth. Maybe that explains why we have all these underground facilities from the ancient world that we just can't survive. 60 cities in ancient Turkey have been found all underground. Were the Anunna hiding underground during this Ice Age period when Earth was catapulted 600 years through space between stars? I don't know. I just know that I'm a chronologist, and all this makes sense in the historical record. I've already cataloged all my source materials and show where all this came from. I just have a problem with the fact that it's too perfect. Here's 4639 BC, Earth is captured in the Sol orbit. 4309 BC is the first contact between Earth and the Phoenix since the Nemesis Cataclysm. These are cursed Earth periods right here. You see them in red. They're 414 years. This is 138 times 3. It's 3 Phoenix orbits, each 414 years, all the way here to the year 2040. It's so bizarre. The cursed Earth system isn't my invention. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, who employed the Assyrian eponyms and the Book of Jasher, the Book of Jubilees, the biblical chronomarkers, he put together his own chronology of the ancient world. And in his chronology, he has some of these exact dates. He has the date for the flood at 2239 BC, which is entirely different analysis than me. He has the sun darkening earthquake episode that happened in 1687 BC, happened exactly then. He's got 3895 BC as year 1 of the pre-flood world. You can't make this stuff up. His research is absolutely independent of my own, and yet they're 100% comport with each other. So he came up with the cursed Earth system because he noticed, having no knowledge of Phoenix or the 138-year orbit or none of that, he believes that Earth is patterned in episodes of 414 years, and he's documented probably close to 60 or 70 of those periods, and it's very interesting. This is just 414 in linear fashion all the way to the end of the Phoenix chronology. Now, we get to the Great Flood, and It's in the month of May, which in the ancient world's calendar was the second month. It's the 1656 year of the pre-flood world. It is 1656 Annus Mundi. The flood is caused by the phoenix, which in the ancient Sumerian records is called Appen. Now, the cataclysm at this time is confirmed by Dr. Barry Wormkessel, who calls it Vulcan. The deluge predicted and told to Noah, to Manu, to Utnapishtim, to I can't even pronounce it, Zasudra, Bokika. The antediluvian period is now over. The vapor canopy collapses due to Phoenix, and it is now, according to the ancients, the birth of the sun. The Heliolithic age begins. The mandate of heaven in China completely changes. A new star appears. Hundreds of cities are shoved undersea. There is a worldwide volcanism, continental quakes and mud floods, red rains and cosmic dust fallout. There is a temporal pole shift and a really good description of what happened in the book of Jasher. So we have this epic cataclysm. This was 3,000 years of history. These four charts that I showed you in the beginning of the video. We just covered this 3,000 years of history. And remember, Theopompus and others in ancient times said that there was a 3,000 year period in the ancient world where gods contended with each other. That too is very interesting. 3,000 is a very definite number. So, I really don't know how to explain this almost perfect synchronicity outside the context of a simulation theory. So, this 3,000 years is just, it's too perfect. That events that would happen, that would transpire this way, it's just so unusual that every 600 years something happens that's relative to the two stars and the bodies that orbit them. Yet that's only relative up to the flood. And the Chinese regarded the flood as it was a great division in time itself. Okay, well this may be a clue, because the 600-year periods continue unabated. They are thematic, and we're going to get to them in this video. But what was happening during those 600-year periods is not the same after the flood. Now it becomes a narrative of great personalities and heroes and things like that. It's not about worlds and planets anymore. Something's changed. So we have arrived to the great flood of antiquity. Just in this little small area, just tiny, I can't even separate it with the cursor because the area is so small. But just in this tiny little area, we have 2233 BC, which is the start of Babylon's astronomical records according to Callisthenes. We have 2200 BC as the Great Flood according to Roman Marcus Varro, a historian. And in the Frisian Oralind manuscript, fascinating text, we have the date for the Great Flood at 2194 BC. It is also right here. Well, we can't separate it from this black line. That's how close it is. In 2179 BC is the flood date of the Toltec records. 2137 BC is the date the Chinese give for the cataclysm involving a sun darkening. 2100 BC is the start date for reliable Near East dating according to academia. What this means is all these different cultures and civilizations dated the Great Flood at this period of time. That they could get it narrowed down to this area is awesome. It's fantastic. That we have it so precise is for different chronological reasons. I have an entire video about the Great Flood showing 21 different ways to measure what year it happened. And it's 2239 BC. So it's profound that so many different cultures all dated this Great Flood at this period. And an interesting aside is I know there's a whole school of thought who follow Graham Hancock and all his followers and copyists, all these guys that have published these famous books, but they're all copying about Atlantis and how the Great Flood was in 10,000 BC and all. You can't support none of these authors have ever supported that theory with any actual historical textual
basically ancient writers, they have to ignore all the ancient chronographers in order to promote that theory. I cite those theories, like I just cited right now. I just cite all these different authors, and there's many more. You go watch my video or read my published books, you'll find many more other authors who basically knew the general time of the Great Flood. In order to promote the Plato version, 9,000 BC or 9,000 years, 9,500 BC and all that, they have to ignore a tremendous amount of historical data and hyperinflate years when the Egyptians were providing them lunar dates. Yeah, the Egyptian Atlantis cataclysm was only the 14th or 15th century BC because it was lunar reckoning. They were supposed to divide everything by 12 or 13, and ancient authors mention this. They critique Plato. But Graham Hancock and many others, just like him, man, they ignore all this to promote these fantastic theories. I'm not going to go off. Y'all already know I've gone off on them guys before. I'm not going to do it anymore. So, it's going to make this video unnecessarily long. So here we are after the flood. We have 1963 BC, right here. Here it is, right here. It's a Phoenix episode again. 1963, we have a temporary pole shift. We have quakes. We have bodies of water that are moving. We do not know today the extent of the cataclysm. This very well could have been as big as 2239 or 1687. I don't know. I do know that it's positively dated with exactitude, and the entire episode is mentioned in the Ramayana. But we'll get to that. That's a whole other video. Matter of fact, I'm doing a video on the Battle of Kuruksata, and that's probably going to be mentioned in that. So, right at the tail, after 1963 BC, the Phoenix leaves the system. It's replaced right behind it. 1915 BC, Nemesis X object returns to the system. Near East texts describe terrible sky dragon. Writings of India tell of a great darkness, flames and stones that fall from the sky. Babylonians recorded that Tiamat passed, a great blackness that swallowed the stars. Mountains shook. This was the 32nd year of the reign of Nimrod. But Nimrod is just a Jewish version for an actual historical king named Merodach. Most of you know him as the Babylonian Marduk. But in Sumer, his name was Amar-Udak. This is almost exactly right here, 1913 BC. It is the end of the third Bacton of 144,000 days. This is the 432,000th day since the beginning of the Mayan long count in 3113 BC. Right here, while Nemesis X object is still in the inner system during the 60 years it's in the inner system, something unusual happens. One of the most famous stories from biblical world, and even secular Sibylline oracles, Greek texts, many people mention this story. In 1899 BC, the Tower of Babel incident occurs. It is a disaster, confusion of tongues, languages. The empire of Akkad is founded among the ruins as so many other peoples basically catch out and leave the Near East. So the Akkadian Empire is founded during this 60-year window when Nemesis X object is in the inner system. But also the confusion of tongues, languages happens while the people are building a pyramid or a monument. That's when this happened. It is 1899 BC. It's very unusual. Also, while Nemesis X object is still in the system in its final year, 1855 BC, this is the 60th year the object is in the inner system. A large population of the Anunna remained on the surface with ordinary humans as the dead world disappeared for another 732 years. During this 60-year period, the Sumerian government, institutions, language, and culture vanished, replaced by the Akkadian and other warlike nation-states throughout the Near East, like Assyria. Right here on the tail, as Nemesis X object is leaving the inner system and heading back toward the dark star, Nemesis, along the Nemesis ecliptic, In 1849 BC, Sodom and Gomorrah, Adma, Zeboim, many Sumerian cities, and those further east in the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, they are destroyed in massive fallout that hints of technology, not natural disasters. Sumerian civilization completely ends. Akkad is weakened, and the Amuru, the Westerners, invade and occupy and rule the entire Near East. These would, in 1735 BC, take over Egypt as well. They were called the Shepherd Kings, or Hyksos. They are an Amorite dynasty. The origin of these Amuru is quite the mystery. But that's subject matter of my other videos in the Anunna files. So we had this period where Sumer collapses completely. Akkad collapses, and we're replaced with Babylon, Elam. We have Assyria, and the Amorites. Babylon continued as a geographical area, but not as a ruling power, because Hammurabi of this period was the 5th king of the Amorite dynasty. The Amorites were in control now, and they were controlling from Mitanni and Mari, which is in Syria. They were a maritime race. This was during the Heliolithic Maritime Empire. So now we come to 1687 BC, which is 552 years, a phoenix cycle after the Great Flood. This occurs the Ogygian deluge. Cataclysm at this time is confirmed by Dr. Barry Wormkessel, who calls it Vulcan. Jacob foreknew of the sun darkening. The people of Tiahuanaco predicted the coming of the sun disaster. Heliolithic maritime empire collapses all around the world. It's a new world age in India, and begins a 25-year darkness and famine recorded in Mediterranean and in the Americas. Minoan linear A begins. Giant object is seen in the sky. The sons of the Sun dynasty all collapse. The Book of Jasher, the Bamboo Books of China, Marcus Varro, Augustine, Julius Africanus. Oh, they all mention this event. The Kraken floods Joppa and darkens the sun in the legend of Perseus. Perseus is the destroyer. Easter Island is abandoned, and scientists claim that at this time, the Avellino eruption happened in Italy at Mount Vesuvius. That's all right here. The flood of Ogyges was devastating. Now, during this period, shortly after 1687 BC, we have the biblical dating for the 7-year famine in Egypt in Genesis, which occurs during the 25-year darkness, 1659 through 1652 BC. I did not date that 7-year famine. That comes from biblical chronologist Stephen Jones. Then we have another 600-year Anunnaki Ner epic. It's right here where the cursor is. This is so unusual. On this exact year, the hero of the Bible, Jacob, who had been renamed Israel, dies. And on his deathbed, he passes the prophetic birthrights to future empires to his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and refuses to bless Joseph, who had already received his blessing, becoming the Czar, or the Grand Vizier of Egypt. Shortly after this period is 1549 BC. The Phoenix has returned. We don't have a lot of records for this period, but in 1549 BC, 3 suns shone. It was an unusual storm. The sun dimmed, it was a red sky, and there were tsunamis. But the period is really interesting because there's a historian named Castledon who has published reports about this disaster. He dates it at 1550 BC. It is the same event. He just rounded it off. He's one year away from the true date of 1549 BC. But he claims that there was a terrible cataclysm that ruined the Cyclades region in the Mediterranean at this time. Shortly after this is 1513 BC. It is another Mayan Bacton of 144,000 days that is complete. And then after this is 1411 BC. 138 years after the Cyclades destruction. Phoenix returns 138 years later. It's a temporary pole shift and restabilizing. A new star appears, meteoritic fallout. The sky turns bloody red. There is flooding. The temporal pole shift, a temporal pole shift is not like lithospheric displacement, where the entire crust is moved over the mantle into a new permanent position. A temporal pole shift is when everything just goes chaotic, goes north and south, and oceans slip their basins, but the world restabilizes back on its original poles. Nothing is actually moved. So, following this event in 1413, again, 1411, we have Phoenix again. Nothing happened on all four of these calendars in between 1411 BC and the next event, 1273 BC. Phoenix returns 138 years later. Atreus, renowned in the stories of the Greeks, Atreus predicted the sun darkening, and he won the throne of Argos by doing so against his brother. It is claimed that Atreus was an astronomer. That's very interesting. It shows a knowledge of the ancient Phoenix periodicity. The sky turned bloody red. The sun darkened. Socrates, Archilochus, Seneca in Thyestes, Euripides in Electra, they all mention this event. The Annals of King Merciless II of Hatti, the Hittites, also mentions this in their cuneiform records. Again, 138 years later, nothing happens in between these dates. It's Phoenix again in the ancient world. This is the Middle Bronze Age. It's 1135 BC. The Phoenix appears. There's a cataclysm at this time. It too is confirmed by Dr. Barry Wormkessel, who calls it Vulcan. The Tuatha Danann predicted the sun darkening before the war. They had a huge battle in the Second Battle of Moytura, where they defeated the Furbolgs. Now, they didn't tell the Furbolgs the sun was going to darken, and the Furbolgs, who were considered giants in Ireland, actually believed that the Tuatha Danann had casted spells on the sun, and they grew terrified. So basically, the invading Tuatha Danann conquered Ireland by subterfuge. They made a natural phenomenon look like it was their ally. Now, a Mediterranean Dark Age begins. Minoan Linear B collapses. The mandate of heaven in China changes. A comet darkens the sun, blood red over Babylonian skies. Mediterranean tsunami wipes away ports and ships. Dust rains occur. This was a very large event. 1135 BC could very well have been one of these larger deals. The only reason it's not, I didn't put it on the chart, is because I have no evidence whatsoever of any type of pole shift or lithospheric displacement that had happened on this date. So I left it small, but it was a widespread destruction. And it was the last one for a while, caused by Phoenix. But within just a few years, like a dozen years after this, we have Nemesis X object returned, 1123 BC. It's right here all by itself. China recorded an attack on the sun. The Shang dynasty collapses. This is the start of the object's 60-year transit in the inner system. Shortly after, in 1113 BC, we have the end of another 144,000 days of the Mayan long count. And in 1039 BC, we return to the Anunnaki neurochronology. It is now focused on personalities. The first one was Jacob 600 years after the flood. The next one here is the birth of the giant slayer, King David, future king of Israel. The very next Phoenix episode was, I don't even have it on the chart, but in 997 BC, according to scientists, a large meteorite impact occurred in North America in the Badlands of Montana. It's not on this chart, but this data was pulled from a book, and it's in one of my published books. I cite the sources on that. I should have put it on the chart, but I really don't have anything but that one single detail. And the next one's not on the chart either. It's 859 BC. It's not on the chart, but it should be. But it is on the other Phoenix chart that I showed you earlier. 859 BC is unique because we have an actual relief from antiquity that shows the Israelite King Jehu bowing down before Shalmaneser of Assyria. I think, don't quote me, but I think it's Shalmaneser III. But what's really interesting is that The relief is specifically dated 850, well, in our calendar, 859 BC. And in the top of the relief is a depiction of the winged phoenix. I thought that's pretty coincidental. But it's not on this chart because we don't have any evidence of a disaster at the time. We do have an evidence, though, that the prophet Elijah was taken up into heaven. But I don't know when that happened. So, 721 BC is the next event. It, too, is a Phoenix episode. It's right here where you see my cursor. In 721 BC, the Assyrian inscriptions have a new world age beginning, and the kingdom of Israel falls to Assyria. The 10 tribes are deported. So we have a reference to this sun darkening episode in the Almagest. Plutarch, Ovid, Marcus Varro recorded it. The sun and moon darkened, clouds were seen in the heavens. The sky was on fire. There were noises from the sky as well. And Chinese astronomers also record that there was a disturbance in the sun. This is 721 BC. One thing I don't have here that I should is mention that there are Roman records about the 7 kings of Rome, and that it was during the reign of the 7 kings that there was a great disturbance in the sun as well, and a calendar change. But we'll get to that in just a second. As a matter of fact, it's the very next one. 713 BC, this blue sphere right here. 713 BC, the sun retrogrades 10 degrees. The story is in the Bible. It's the sundial of Ahaz. The sun, the shadow of the sundial goes back 10 degrees at the same time that 185,000 Assyrian soldiers are vaporized by a blast from the sky. This is a flux tube. This flux tube is energy that moves back and forth between two planetary bodies that get too close together. We have absolutely documented a flux tube phenomenon before in the year 1994 when a giant comet got too close to Jupiter and a flux tube discharge was filmed, and it hit the comet and it broke it into 21 different pieces that all slammed into the surface of Jupiter. So 713 BC is very unique because this exact dating is provided by many chronologists. I didn't make this up, but it just so happens, if you believe in coincidence, it also just so happens to be the Mayan Bactan. It is the 6th. It's the end of the 6th Mayan Bactan. 864,000 days are complete. Each Bactan is 144,000 days when this occurred. When this occurred, time changed. Remember, the Mayan long count is about counting time, and the prophecies attached to the Mayan long count concern the collapse of time. Now, at this date, it's really fantastic to find out that so many different cultures all around the world changed their calendars from 360 days to 365 days in this year. Now, the Mayan Bactans, you see they're 400. Look, 400, 400, 400, 400, 400. Not anymore. From this date on, they are now 394 years, moving all the way forward in time. This is why exactly the Mayan long count never ended in 2012. This is what the scholars never took into consideration. When the Mayan count began, it began under a 360-day year, but the year has not always remained 360 days. That was the problem in these calculations. So, moving on from 713 BC, we have 583 BC. It's right here where my cursor is. Thales of Miletus was a Phoenician by remote descent. This is just a clever cultural way of not calling him Israelite. That's what he was. Now, Thales of Miletus predicted the sun darkening 2 years before it happened, and it occurred in the month of May. Now, this is very interesting, and the historian Vandenberg, he shows that a new calendar began at Delphi in Greece, and even the Japanese imperial period of the sons of the sun begins. A whole new calendar appeared in Japan as well. So, on the monument of Yassilikaya in Turkey, we have an eclipsed sun on your monument concerning a truce between the Medes, or between the, I can't remember the two different groups. One of them was the Medes, but they were attacking somebody. And on the monument it shows that at the time of the battle, which is recorded by Herodotus of Halicarnassus in his book, The Histories, and I cite this in my published book, When the Sun Darkens, I cite the full account when two armies were about to fight and all of a sudden the battle stopped because the sun darkened and it terrified both armies. They had seen eclipses before, and Herodotus mentions two other eclipses in his book and calls them what they are. But this was something unusual, and it stopped the battle, and they built a monument, and that monument is seen today at JasonArchaix. So moving on, we have 445 BC. Only one incident. I mean, I say one incident, but it's only one. We only have one piece of evidence from this date. It's very interesting, though. De Jong recorded a disaster caused by a comet that started widespread fires. He believes the death toll was probably something about 800,000 people. It's very interesting. Following that, we have 439 BC. We're back on the Anunnaki Ner chronology of the 600-year periods. Now, 439 BC, we have in Athens, Greece, the Parthenon is commemorated. On the Parthenon are beautiful sculptures of the Titanomachy, the War of the Giants and the Gods, the Trojan War, and Nereus. Nereus is a personification. It is the Anunnaki Ner turned into a pronoun. Remember, Noah was said to have lived 600 years. Nereus is the old man of the sea. His daughters were the Nereids. He is the Greek Noah, otherwise known as Deucalion. He is on this monument, and this monument was commemorated on a Ner, a 600-year Ner. This is beyond coincidence. You can't make this stuff up. Moving on, we get to 331 BC. 331 BC, right here. This black sphere you see, Nemesis X object returned starting its 60-year transit. The moon dimmed and the sky turned blood red. Visible from Persia, the Near East, and Carthage. Alexander of Macedon's soldiers witnessed flames fall from the sky. Modern eclipse computations show that no eclipses happened at this time, so this was something else. Alexander becomes the Great. He is Alexander the Great when he takes Babylon and he sits on the throne. This is the 600th year since Israel and Judah split, called the Divided Kingdom calendar. We're in the 60-year window here. In this 60-year window, we come across 319 BC. Another 144,000 days of the Mayan long count ends, a new Bacton begins. And just a few years later, in 307 BC, we have an account in the Oralind text about disasters happening across Europe. Now, those disasters could very well be Phoenix. They could also be related to Nemesis X object. We're just not sure. But we are positive that in the 60th year and final year of the transit of the Nemesis X object, in the year 271 BC, the planet Venus is eclipsed. It disappears in the sky. This is recorded by the Ptolemies. And of course, we know this is Nemesis X object passing between Earth and Venus, blocking it out. This has happened before. Moving on, we have a really 240-year period of basically nothing happening, just world history, punic wars, all kinds of things happening, but nothing unusual. And then in 31 BC, the Chinese Han Dynasty collapses. Let's see. Excuse me. Macedonian records, there are continental quakes from the Aegean to Judea in the month of May during the Battle of Actium. And in the Yucatan, there is much ruin. It's the final date of the Olmecs. There is a stele that has been found, an Olmec date. It is the very last date of the Olmecs. And it is translated in our Anno Domini calendar as 31 BC. Over Egypt in this year, a sky dragon was seen. Interpret that any way you want to. That is the Phoenix. At least Mother Shipton called the Phoenix sky dragon. So moving on, we pass over the BC Anno Domini line. It's just an imaginary line in a calendar. One goes forward in time, one goes backward in time. We arrive at the date of 76 Common Era. This is the AD calendar. Mayan Bacton of 144,000 days ends in this year. And over Europe is noticed a star spear. We don't have much data on that at all. Moving forward to 162, the year 162, we are back on the Anunnaki Ner chronology. And in 162, a pandemic disease afflicted China for 11 years and spread throughout the east to the west, infecting the Roman Empire for 16 years. Entire provinces belonging to Rome were depopulated. Amidst the massive loss of life, the Han Dynasty absolutely fell, initiating an Asian Dark Age that lasted over 4 centuries until the emergence of the Tang Dynasty. Now, there's so many different dynasties in China, it's ridiculous, and it's hard to follow them because some of them are like the Egyptian dynasties. They overlap. It's just crazy. But this was on the Anunnaki Ner 600-year chronology. And in 246, in the year 246, we have Phoenix returning. It hasn't been seen since 31 BC. I believe the year between them was 108 AD, 108 Common Era. But we don't have any records for 108. But in 246, we definitely have records. In old Britain annals, we have a bloody sword in the sky and it rains blood. Phoenix follows 138 years later. And we have in the writings of Lycosthenes in his Chronicon that a bloody pillar filled the sky. There is mention of sky dragons and monsters battling each other and things like that. We really can't make sense of it. The frames of reference for those people back then were very different. So we move forward in history even more, and now we get to 462 Common Era. Again, we're back on the Anunnaki Ner. No, we're not. I'm sorry. 462 is that's Nemesis X object. It enters the inner system on its 60-year transit. It's been gone for 732 years, since 271 BC. Now, there's an earthquake. The statue of Zeus at Constantinople is removed from an older site. Well, which was removed from an older site is now destroyed. It is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We don't have hardly any other records for this. We're entering into a period for which there is very little known. And there's a reason for this. After 462, in the year 470, 8 years later, we have the end of another Mayan Bacton of 144,000 days and the beginning of another Bacton. And in 522, everything changes. 522 is a very unique year in world history. You see right here, where I have this white box, 522 is the only year in world history that Phoenix and the Nemesis X object appear in the inner system together. Here is Phoenix in 522. Here is Nemesis X object in 522. We don't know which caused which, but this is when the Dark Age began over Europe. C.E. Britton on his writings on the reign of Octa of Kent in the Welsh Annals records earthquakes and sky dragons and monsters battling in the sky. 522 is the 60th year of the Nemesis X object in the inner system. Earthquakes devastated Olympia, Greece. Sky dragons were seen over Britain. A celestial war of monsters raining great drops of blood, followed by famine. The old records of Kent record that a strange star appeared attached to a light ray that ended in a flaming dragon. Like I said, the Dark Ages begins here at 522. It is the only year in world history these two objects are seen at the exact same time. In the old Britain record, it is claimed a celestial war of monsters. This implies visibility on 2 separate objects or more. During this 60-year presence, the Mosh culture of Peru absolutely vanishes. It is an anthropological mystery. Following this 522 event, we arrive now at 762 Common Era. The Karaite movement begins on this date. let me explain what the Karaite movement is real quick. Okay, there's a huge rift in Jewish society on this date. This year begins the Karaite movement. The Jews were pretty much unified up until then, but something happened among the rulership of the Exilarchy, and this guy starts a whole new movement, and it takes form, and he pretty much condemns the old guard as not holding to the laws of the Torah and all that. And he creates a whole new movement, and it gains ground, and it creates this huge rift. That rift today is what separates the Jewish community around the world today. The Karaites, the keepers of the book, keepers of the law, and the rest. It started right here on this Anunnaki year, Anunnaki Ner period year, right here. 762, the Karaite movement begins. It continues to this day. It's a very strong movement. That's actually a whole rift. It's a whole different branch of Judaism now. Now, I could care less neither way for either branch, but among them, they do care. It's a big deal to them. So some of those Jewish families won't even marry into the opposing Judaic faith. It's crazy. So this is also the first year of the Abbasid dynasty in Babylon. In Baghdad. The Baghdad is a new Babylon. It is an Islamic version of Babylon. It's almost right there at Babylon too. Now, it's the region of ancient Babylon. There's a Mayan conclave in this year in 762 that meets at Copan. These sky watchers meet to correlate the calendar. The sky watchers serve as the Mayan culture's chronologists. This event is recorded on altar Q at Copan, and it depicts 16 sky watchers from all over the Mayan realm come together and make an agreement about what year it is. This is very interesting because when you add up the years here, this is on the Anunnaki Ner. It's not only the 600th year of this period, but counting all the way back to year 1 of the Anunnaki chronology, when these Mayan sky watchers got together, it was exactly the 6,000th year of the Anunnaki Ner chronology. That's profound. Following this date is 798 Common Era, 798 AD. We have quakes, we have a dark sun, black sun, the flooding in Mayan cities, and we have an absolute vanishing of whole communities of the Maya. They're gone. We don't know what happened to them today. It's still a mystery, but they didn't survive beyond this date very long. They completely vanished as a culture, were absorbed by their enemies. Whatever happened, we don't know, but they're gone. Excuse me. And it took a while. It wasn't immediate, but this is when it began. Following 798 is the year 864, foundation of time number in the Anno Domini calendar. I have already showed many times in videos that 864 seems to be the coding protocol of our reality. 864 links seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. It's very unique how the number 864 links all these things. It is the foundation of Sumerian sexagesimal reckoning. So we have here the Mayan long counts 144,000 days of the next Bacton, ending and beginning right here at this 864 AD year. Remember, the Anno Domini calendar is a retrospective calendar. It didn't start with year 1 when any significant event occurred. It was created in retrospect right after this 522 CE event. This Phoenix episode in 522 CE started a whole new dark age. Then the Roman papacy had a guy named Sosigenes create a calendar in they say he did it in 526 CE. I don't know, but his calendar is very interesting because it seems to be absolutely a part of the artificial construct that I have detected. So anyway, moving forward, we get to 864. This is showing that this is 100% proof of artificiality. That the Mayan long count, which started on 3113 BC, would go all the way here, change on 713 BC to 394 years instead of its original 400 years, and hit exactly on 864 AD. Remember, When the change occurred, it was the 864,000th day. You can add it up yourself. The Mayan long count began 3113 BC. 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years, 400 years. Each one of these 400 years is 144,000 days. Each one of these is 360 days a year. Add this up, it's 864,000 days. You can't make this stuff up. Just can't. This is all coding protocols. This is programming. Now, the Mayan calendar is an ancient American timeline, and the reset here that it's measuring involves the disappearance of the Maya themselves. That's what's happening right here. In their calendar, the Maya who recorded the calendar vanish. So moving on, we get to 1212 BC. 1212 AD, Common Era. And in the year 1212, we have mass human vanishings, and we have quakes in the Middle East. But the human vanishings in the year 1212 are connected to a very intriguing story called the Children's Crusade. Two kids started going through Europe preaching that since the adults can't defeat the Muslims and free Jerusalem from the heathens, then it must be the children of God who are supposed to do it. The movement gained ground, and within months, hundreds of thousands of children throughout Europe marched toward Jerusalem. No one knows what happened to those children. The historians of the day have left us many records about the children passing through their townships and towns and whole long trains, armies of kids moving toward the south and Jerusalem. There are no historians from that period that tell us what happened to those children. We do have many historians trying to tell us what they think happened to those children, only in retrospect, long after. We have theories about slavers, we have theories about murders, there was entirely way too many of these children. We don't know what happened to them, nor is there any records whatsoever in any of the Muslim caliphates, and they were very extensive record keepers. Nothing about the arrival of all these children, armies of children, in the Muslim lands. They never made it. We don't know what happened to those people. We don't know what wired all these kids up to do to march like that. It's a mystery. It's a Pied Piper of Hamelin type mystery. This is followed in 1254 CE right here. 1254 CE. I don't even see it. You know what? It's not even on this map. I'll be damned. Totally missed it. Sorry about that, guys. But in 1254 CE, the Nemesis X object returns to the inner system, starting its 60-year transit. The Seventh Crusade of Rome against Islam occurs to secure Jerusalem, but it fails. The war between England and Scotland would last the same exact 60 years that the Nemesis X object was in the inner system. Let me repeat this now. Oh, that's why it's not on the map. Nothing actually happened as far as cataclysms go. But the exact same 60 years that the Nemesis X object was in the inner system near Earth was the same 60 years that England and Scotland would be at war with each other during that period. It's a very famous period of history. It involves William Wallace and all that, Knights Templar and all that. But that's not for this video. So this is following 1258. While Nemesis is still in the system, the Nemesis X object, in 1258, we have the end of a Mayan Bacton of 144,000 days, begins another one. And then the 60th year. The 60th year, excuse me, the 60th year is 1314 BC. We have plague fogs. We have quakes in China and a great black darkness that blotted out the stars over Europe. It ends the period known as the Seven Comets over Europe. Terrible famine begins, followed shortly after by the great Black Death plague that killed a third of mankind. That is profound. And following this is 1362 Common Era. And in 1362 we find that we are back on the Anunnaki Ner chronology, which way over here in the past, after the flood, started involving Jacob's grandsons, the Israelites, deportations of Israel, King David of Israel, the giant slayer. It's really profound. And then 439 BC, the Parthenon, the ancient Greeks, many of them who were descended from the Danan being, those of you know, the tribe of Dan and all those associations. ancient Ireland. So we had these associations, man, on the Anunnaki neurochronology. It's profound that now in 1362, which is also on the neurochronology, we have the beginning of exploration and awareness, the foundation of Western civilization of post-Dark Age antiquity. In fact, in 1362 AD, precisely, there was a Norse Goth expedition that was sent by King Magnus of Norway, who surveyed, these guys surveyed North America, and they left behind the Kensington Rune Stone, which the inscription was discovered in 1898 as proof of their presence across the interior of North America in the year 1362. That's interesting. This region later to become Canada in the United States of America. Following this, in 1488 BC, we have a Phoenix year, but it's not on this chart for this reason, because this was the year that Mother Shipton was born. She prophesied of the 2040 return of the Sky Dragon. And I have an entire video about that. Following this is 1626 Common Era. It is on this map. It's right here where my cursor is. 1626, the Chinese record sun darkening, meteoric rain. Let me tell you that story real quick. That story is really interesting because there was a drought in China, and these people got together, and they had some Taoist monks bless the sky, try to do a rain dance, whatever they tried to do, and they promised that they would come and pray and they'd do that. Well, in the middle of the proceedings, the sky darkened, and then instead of rain, stones fell from the sky and killed many people. So when the episode was over, they gathered up the Taoist priests, and the Chinese people picked up stones and stoned them. So they didn't want their prayers anymore. So following this in 1652 CE, we have the 12th backed in 144,000 days. It is absolutely complete. It is the year 1652. One Bacton left. So, following this is 1764. Astronomer Hoffman, in the month of May, watching through a telescope, sees a dark object, gigantic. It passes over 1/5 of the entire sun's surface. So it barely just clipped it. As over 1 million Europeans see it with the naked eye. And this object is traveling from north to south over the ecliptic, just like the Nemesis X object. The reason it travels north to south is because the ecliptic of the dark star Nemesis transects our own ecliptic and Sol right now. They form like a cross. So 1764 being over, our next year right here, you see it, 1902. I have 3, maybe 4, I can't remember, maybe 4 videos about 1902. In the month of May, an unknown star appeared. There is quakes, volcanic eruptions, red rains, dust veil. Charles Fort himself called the year 1902 the other dark age of the year 1902. It is reset. In 1902, here's something really, really interesting. In the year 1902, a farmer plowing a field near La Jamora in the mountains of Veracruz State discovered the Tuxtla statuette, later acquired by the Smithsonian Institute. This little statuette is a squat, bullet-shaped headed human with a duck bill and wings covered in 75 epi-Olmec glyphs. Its own inscribed long count date is March 162 CE, which in 1902 made it the oldest long count calendar ever found. Did you hear those dates? This object is found in 1902, but it refers to the date 162, way over here. Let's go back to 162. What happened in 162? A pandemic disease afflicted China for 11 years and spread throughout the east and the west, infecting the Roman Empire for 16 years. Entire provinces throughout Rome were depopulated. It was an Asian dark age. So, we don't have any records of what happened in the Americas at that time, but according to this statuette, something bad must have happened. Well, they wouldn't have recorded it on a plague statue. It's very interesting. It's curious how this date of 162 marks a further end of the old culture that met a cataclysmic end, toppling their civilization in 31 BC. All done by the Phoenix. It's crazy. So, after 1902, the hidden reset, we arrive at the final year of the Anunnaki nerd chronology of 600-year periods, the year 1962. 1962 is very interesting. It's just a very interesting year. All the things that have happened. I have a whole video about all the things that happened in 1962, and I can't reiterate it all here. But we do have some interesting things to say here. In 1963, the entrance to a vast subterranean metropolis called Derinkuyu was accidentally discovered. A joint U.S.-Russian base on Mars since 1962 has long been suspected, and there has been released documentation about its existence. I don't know. Now, NASA scientist Gordon McDonald concluded that it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow object. He said this in 1962. And Russian scientists Vasin and I think it's Sharbakov, they claim that the moon is not an artificial satellite, but a hollowed-out planetoid fashioned by some advanced civilization. Radio telescopes in 1962 began detecting strong X-rays coming from the Cygnus region of space, the Cygnus Rift, one of the most mysterious areas of space. In 1962, Cheyenne Mountain Complex is completed. This is relative because throughout history, the Anunna, they built fantastic subterranean facilities. Looks like we're doing the same thing on the same chronology, the same timeline. It's crazy. 1962 is the first year of operations for the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base's Foreign Technology Division. If you don't know anything about this, 1947, the alien assist of Roswell, alien technology. The myth has always been that this stuff has been taken to Area 51, Hangar 18, and all that. That was all government misdirection. Those items were actually sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and held there in the Foreign Technology Division and studied and retro-engineered to create all kinds of alloys and things that we have in our military today. Now, 1962 began the close encounters of the fourth kind. These are abductions of unwilling humans for genetic experiments. 1962 began a spiritual darkening over America and, by extension, the rest of the world. So we get, from 1962, we get to the year 2040. 2040, May 15th or May 16th, the sun darkens by Phoenix. Lithospheric displacement. Oceans slip their basins. New York, London, and hundreds of cities are shoved under sea. There is worldwide volcanism, continental quakes and mud floods, red rains and cosmic dust fallout. It is the sixth seal of the apocalypse. It is the sixth sky dragon of Mother Shipton. It is the black sun of the Hopi. Fenris swallows the sun and moon in the weird of the gods. Ragnarok means the day of darkness. Fulfillment of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, which is the fall of Phoenix. I don't make these things up. Very well documented in my books and in my other videos. This is 2040. This is the sum of that calendar. But 6.5 years later, 2046, we have two different things happening. Nemesis X object returns to the inner system after 732 years since it was last seen in 1314 BC. This is the second of two sky dragons predicted by Mother Shipton, the wormwood of the book of Revelation that kills 1/3 of mankind. This begins 60 years till it exits the system in the year 2106 Common Era, the year 6000 Annus Mundi. Year 1 of the 6,000 years is way back here at 3895 BC, which is year 1 of the pre-flood world. A new heavens and new earth was created by lithospheric displacement when Phoenix caused a pole shifting and initiated a vapor canopy. So, this is also the end of the 144th day of the 13th Bacton. The Mayan long count ends right here on 2046, the exact same year that the Nemesis X object enters the system for the final time. In the Mayan prophecies, the whole Mayan calendar discusses two things. The prophecies attached to the Mayan belief in this long count calendar is that one, time will collapse, and two, that there is an invasion of some type of weird demonic beings, demonic entities. Both of these are represented in the book of Revelation. The Aztec stone of the fifth sun, called the Aztec calendar, by many erroneously, shows a god in the middle of the deal, which is the fulfillment of time. It shows this god in the center, and he has a sword, a dagger protruding for a tongue out of his mouth. In the book of Revelation, when God returns to earth to execute vengeance on his enemies, he comes and a sword protrudes from his mouth. This is very similar. But in the book of Revelations, we have time collapsing. It specifically says that the day and the night will be reduced by a third. Well, that's time collapsing. That means we're not going to have a 24-hour day anymore. Something's going to happen to our world to where it rotates faster. To be reduced by a third is to eliminate 8 hours. This means the day will be 16 hours long. That's pretty interesting. That's going to change all the calendars in the world. That makes the Mayan long count absolutely correct. Time collapses. So, we also have, in the same trumpet judgments as the time collapsing of the book of Revelation, during this apocalypse, the same trumpet judgments also describe the invasion of the locust demons. So we have some parallels here from totally different sources. And the final event, which is not on this it is not on this calendar at all, is 138 years after the 2040 Phoenix episode. It is the year 2178. The reason I mention this year is because 2178 is the subject matter of my video, The Archaics Paradox. I'm a simulationist. I believe that we are inside of a simulation, and I believe that simulation was it was initiated by humans. We know that there is going to be an event. We know that our star is going to collapse.
As I said in the past, I believe that we're trying to solve a problem. I believe that the origin of the simulation itself is humans. I don't see any evidence of any ancient aliens coming and doing anything. They're outside of theoretical material. There's no evidence for that. So, having researched so much stuff throughout antiquity, I'm finding all these mathematical patterns associated to the appearance of astronomical bodies in history, and then the subsequent events that followed those, and being able to put them into an architectural synthesis that people can understand, and be able to use dates found from other sources to verify all this material, can only mean that the simulation itself was meant for this purpose. This isn't an accidental discovery. It means that someone is trying to figure out which narratives will play out to their wants. If these dates before the Great Flood are all so architectural, they're just so perfect. Every 138 years, every 600 years, every 792 years, 60 years inside the system, the periodicity is phenomenal. And to be able to verify them with with hundreds of source materials gathered from other sources, not my own, that would comport with this entire synthetic timeline, it's beyond belief. It's just not believable. So it denotes artificiality. So for objects to appear in our solar system with such exactitude in the month of May, over and over and over and over, no alterations to the periodicity, how is it possible after the year 713 BC, when we have in the historical record all these cultures that changed their year from 360 days to 365 days because of a cataclysm. All these calendars. I have a whole video that itemizes all these different cultures that did that and the historians that mention it in antiquity. How's it possible that Phoenix still appears in the month of May every 138 years, unless two different coded protocols were running simulations at the exact same time? They don't interfere with each other. They coalesce. The Nemesis X object is a protocol. The Mayan long count, a protocol. Phoenix is a protocol. The Anunnaki Nur chronology in 600-year periods is a protocol. They all run simultaneously. These are only 4 of the many that I have found. It's not possible in a Newtonian world. Someone's trying to figure something out. After the year 2239 BC, in the month of May, the Great Flood, these things can all go in different directions, and maybe they have, and maybe this is just one simulation that I've isolated on this one chart. But before 2239 BC, it seems to be a template that never deviates. This is the template. Everything after the Great Flood can go in different directions, and maybe that is, but that's just a theory. I don't know. All I know is that this is too artificial to be true. Therefore, in my worldview, in my paradigm, everything that I've discovered in world history and been able to date through other sources, it's simulated. It's simulated for me to believe it. It may or may not be true. I don't know.